I just want to give you a little background on how I got here. My graduate degree, I started it wanting to just create beautiful spaces for people. That's all I really knew. And as I dove into that, and as I came to understand what that meant, the idea of healing gardens popped up out of all of that. And it turned into the desire to create a healing garden for USU campus. But as goes with professors and discussions, that idea became more and more developed into the idea of what does a healing campus look like? What would it require for a university campus to be healing as a whole? And so I developed this project with these two questions, essentially. Can the USU landscape be used as a resource to help address the crisis of deteriorating mental health in college students? And if so, can we geospatially analyze campus to determine the most beneficial spaces in the campus landscape? And so using these two questions, I'm going to talk about the mental health crisis at universities across the nation and here at USU, and then discuss some of the research that shows how nature can be a resource for mental health. Using this research, I developed a method to determine how restorative a landscape could be, and those resulted in some maps that I will show you and discuss. And using those maps, I'll provide some recommendations for USU to improve their campus. So in 2009 and the 2010 school year, there were 20.4 million students enrolled in universities across the nation. 10 years later, that enrollment dropped 19.7 to 19.7 million. With that decrease in student enrollment, there was an increase of students reporting anxiety was a concern, an increase of 51.8%. That means that if we apply that percentage to the student population, about 11 million students could have potentially been reporting anxiety as being a huge concern for them. With depression, from 2009 to 2010, that increase was 27.9%, meaning about 9.5 million students were potentially saying that depression was a concern they had in their university experience. With enrollment going down, but these percentages going up, it's obvious that these students need more access to the resources, and the university resources that are available are wearing thin. Universities across the nation are feeling that. In Utah, the National College Health Association or the National College Health Assessment is an assessment given to universities in Utah that show what the current state of the mental health situation is. And one of the questions that is asked is, in the last 12 months, have you felt these things? Yes or no? And so 90% of the 5,200 respondents in Utah said that they felt overwhelmed or exhausted, not from physical activity, in the last 12 months. 65 to 70% said they were sad or lonely. 45% said that they experienced non-functional depression in the last 12 months, while only 29% of them had actually been diagnosed. Out of all of these respondents, though, 14% had gone to their school counseling for help. Why only 14%? What is inhibiting them? What is keeping them from doing that? If we project these numbers onto the total student enrollment in the state, that means that over 85,000 students at some point in the last 12 months dealt with non-functional depression. That's affecting their academics. How is this affecting students at USU? This assessment, it had about 1,200 students at USU reporting in the National College Health Assessment. And one of the questions that they asked is, over the last 4 weeks, how many days have you experienced emotional or mental challenges to the point that your academics were negatively affected? 21% of these 1,200 students said that for more than 6 days during the last 4 weeks, they experienced those challenges. That means if you project that to the 16-week semester and to the 21,000 students on the Logan campus, 4,400 students have almost a quarter of their semester affected negatively by their mental and emotional health. That is a lot of students for a lot of time. And the university is trying to address these needs, and it has resources that are wearing thin. Some of the things that universities are doing around the nation are, well, sorry, I'll get back to that, but some of the things that are keeping students from getting to the campus counseling services are that they don't have, these students are saying they don't have time. They don't know where to go to get help. They're put on a wait list, or they just can't get an appointment. There are financial challenges that they're facing that are inhibiting them, or they're saying, I'd rather do it by myself. I don't want help from professionals. I want to do it by myself or with close family and friends. And so this goes to show that the resources that we provide need to be easily found and accessed by students. They need to be used quickly without requiring a great deal of time. And they need to be able to be used spontaneously at any time of day, whenever a student needs it. And these resources need to be able to be used individually and with others. So current ways that universities around the nation are addressing things are, providing resources to improve their campus rec and wellness centers. They're doing more social media outreach to help students be aware of mental health and how to address mental health concerns. They have open air courtyards and rec and wellness centers. There are color schemes that they're changing around their buildings and trying to implement more natural light. They have wellness messages being talked about in classrooms. There's a mental health crisis center at Utah University of Utah that had its groundbreaking done in May. There are therapy-assisted online programs. There's return on investment analysis showing that it is important to invest in student mental health. And there's a Nature RX program that is put forth by Cornell University, where they define what spaces can be restorative for students on their campus as well as within their community. And they map those out and they help their students gain access to those spaces. I'll talk about that a little later. But then there's also the JED Foundation that helps students know what needs to happen in order to take care of their mental health. At USU specifically, we do have a very good CAPS program. And I want to emphasize that nothing can take the place of good professional help. No matter what resources we have, if we don't have professional therapists, not a lot of progress can be made. And so this is in no way saying we should replace the CAPS program. This is more to supplement it and to help. And so they have the mental wellness program with CAPS, as well as sometimes they do a Stress Busters week where they have activities and groups that can get together during finals week to help release some of that stress from that week. There's also a free ACT guide, which allows students to gain access to professional help via an app. And then there are the prevention programs as well. USU is fully aware that this need is growing and they are trying to address it. James Morales, VP of Student Affairs, said that the demand for counseling services has been growing fairly exponentially over the last few years. As one of the universities that has a sizable population of residential students, we've learned that no one single approach will be best to address their needs. USU knows that we need an arsenal of resources. We need many, many different ways of addressing this. So I am proposing that we use nature as a resource, the campus landscape that is here, that's omnipresent, and that can be accessed 24/7 for our students, can be designed and adjusted to improve the mental health of campus goers. One of the a beautiful quote that kind of explains the relationship we have with nature is from a cancer patient who was going through chemotherapy and was staying in the hospital. And she said that just by being outside with nature, to smell and touch the plants, reduce the depression and dread. I think more positive thoughts, I'm hopeful, and if I cry, I feel the plants understand and do not judge or cringe. And this is emphasized by what Frederick Law Olmsted has said about how nature employs the mind without fatigue, and it exercises it, tranquilizes it, and enlivens it. And thus, through the influence of the mind over the body, gives the effect of refreshing rest and reinvigoration to the whole system. Can you imagine a student saying that about their campus, that their campus landscape reinvigorates them and enlivens them? Some of the research that shows the power of nature starts with Roger Ulrich's study, View from a Window. And this is one of the original studies that kind of got a lot of people thinking about how nature could affect an individual. In this study, they had patients who were recovering from gallbladder surgery. And they found that the patients who had a view of through a window of trees and of nature had, in general, shorter hospital visits. These patients with views of trees also had fewer complications post-surgery. They needed less pain medication, and they were better behaved, according to written comments by medical staff. So they're more pleasant patients because they had trees to look at. And then also a study by Kahn, he compared the effects of recovery for 3 different views from an office space. There was an outdoor scene through a window. That same scene was, a picture was taken of it and put on a plasma TV. And then there was just a blank wall. And after experiencing mild stress, the subject's heart rate recovery was more rapid when they looked out of a window rather than at the plasma screen or a blank wall. With relief from acute pain with Klein, he did a study on the ability of nature-related stimuli to promote relief from acute pain, and he found that the combination of nature views and sounds was more effective in reducing pain than either of those 2 alone. And then lastly, a study by Diet showed that patients undergoing a painful bronchoscopy who were shown views of stimulated nature and heard sounds of a bubbling brook before and during the procedure had a 50% increase in self-reported very good or excellent pain control as compared to control patients. These numbers and these studies show that nature has power in recovery, in stress recovery, in pain recovery, in recovery in general. So if we give students spaces where nature is specifically designed to accomplish this, how much time would they need to be there? How much time would be required to have a college student feel better mentally? It's been shown that as little as 10 minutes of sitting or walking in a diverse array of natural settings significantly and positively impacted defined psychological and physiological markers of mental well-being for college-aged individuals. 10 minutes to start showing improvement. That's like basically a walk to class, and another walk to class, and another walk to class. Students definitely spend more than 10 minutes outside, even during the winter. And so if we have these spaces that are just right there that they're walking through, then that effect of those settings can be very significant over long periods of time. One of the theories that explains why this happens is the attention restoration theory put forth by Stephen and Rachel Kaplan. And they talk about how there are 2 types of attention that we engage with. There's directed attention and there's involuntary attention. Directed attention is when it's essentially forced focus. Those times when you have to be focusing on something, you are really engaged. Sometimes it's like time stops and you are so engaged in what activity you're doing. But when you pull out of that, you're done, you just feel that exhaustion. And that exhaustion is what is directed attention fatigue. That directed attention fatigue means that the mechanism in your brain that helps you to focus is fatigued, it's tired, it needs to be recovered if you're going to be able to direct your attention again. And that's when we need to experience involuntary attention. Involuntary attention is kind of like when you're sitting in a park and you hear the trees rustle with the wind, and it pulled your attention, but it wasn't forced. It allowed your mind to wander. And then there are the birds fluttering by that allow you to just kind of relax and ponder on what's going on around you. That type of attention allows the mechanism in your brain that helps you to focus. That's what helps it recover. And so once your attention is restored, you're able to then go about going forward with your directed attention again throughout your life. And as it goes, if you don't take time to recover that mechanism in your mind, then it can lead to stress, which can lead to anxiety, which can lead to depression, which can lead to all of these concerns. So if we nip it in the bud and help students recover from their focus, then that can be a really powerful resource. But what makes an environment restorative? The Kaplans, in their theory, say that there are 4 things that are required to make it an environment restorative. The first is the sense of being away. And that means that you can be psychologically removed from your current cares and concerns. It helps to be physically set apart as well, but the requirement is to be psychologically able to be distracted from what is going on. The second is a sense of extent. And that extent is the environment allows you to feel completely enveloped and comfortable in the environment. So if you're in a parking lot and you just feel that great expanse, that's not going to be a good sense of extent. But if you're in a grove of trees, you feel that closeness, and that is very, very important. The next is compatibility. And this simply means that the environment allows you to accomplish what you want to accomplish in that space. If there aren't any external factors that are pressing upon you to get something done. There aren't any factors in the environment that inhibit you from doing what you want. Like say you're in a wheelchair and there are steps. That would be low compatibility. But in a flat landscape in a wheelchair, that would be high compatibility. And then there's soft fascinations. And those are kind of what I mentioned earlier, with the wind fluttering through the trees and the birds flying by. There's those elements that grab your attention involuntarily. So with these 4 elements, we have a restorative environment. And very often, these environments are built in healthcare settings, such as at the Massachusetts General Hospital. The Felder Healing Garden was built on the 8th floor of the hospital for access for cancer patients and their families to go as they go through treatment. It's 6,300 square feet and offers beautiful views of the city through a glass wall that keeps you from going further. And this provides a sense of being away because it's so different from the hospital setting. It allows you to step away from all of the medications, all of the white walls, all of the hospital setting. And then that sense of extent also provides you, or is also provided to you, with that beautiful view of just feeling enveloped by this beautiful place. And then with its flat grounds and movable chairs, these people can have control of their environment, creating that sense of compatibility. And then wherever there's nature, there's going to be those soft fascinations as well. The Schneider Healing Garden is a powerful garden that was designed by Virginia Burt, who I was actually able to speak with about her work. And in my conversation with her, she told me about a man that spoke with her about this garden. He was a physicist in the radiology lab at this cancer center. And he told her, "You have no idea how many lives you have touched. I walk out through this garden every day, and I will say to you every time that it enables me to feel washed clean of my day so that I can go home full to my family." This space is a powerful one that has changed lives. It's designed to give a space to people who are dealing with disruptions in their lives that make the present confusing and the future uncertain. While most college students are not dealing with cancer and the difficulties that accompany that journey, they are dealing with a lot of uncertainty and confusion in their lives during this time. Can you imagine giving students at USU a space like this on their campus that can help them feel set apart from their worries and concerns? The University of Maryland has done something very similar to that. In the early 2000s, the campus community dealt with a lot of tragedies, including the 9/11 attacks, a DC sniper, a tornado that killed 2 of their students. A campus community that goes through those things is going to be searching for ways to cope with that. And so the university listened to that need and built this beautiful garden of reflection and remembrance, where students were able to go and sit, feel a sense of community, and feel that sense of being away that the Kaplans talked about, where they could write in waterproof journals their thoughts that were compiled at the end of this. Another garden that is similar to this is the Remembrance Garden at SCSU in Connecticut that was designed by Julie Moore Messervy. And this was to honor the victims of the Sandy Hook shootings. And this also was built on campus to provide students a place to sit and reflect and consider how they are going to make an impact in this world. And lastly, the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College is very unique. Swarthmore College considers their entire campus a garden. If USU considered their entire campus a garden, what would change? How would it look different? These spaces are designed very intentionally, even the little forgotten spaces that seem like they're not important. Everywhere a student turns, they are met with this beautiful, fulfilling nature. And the extent that would be felt here, where you can always feel set apart, wherever you are, you can feel like you can take a break, you can breathe in this beautiful nature, would be a very powerful place to be. So what's the state of USU? We have all of these precedents, these beautiful places. How does USU compare to these ideas? What I was able to do is do an inventory of USU landscape. And I found that it is made up of the trees, plants, water, art, benches, sidewalks, parking, roads, and an element of enclosure. And these elements, I went through literature and I found resources that pointed to how restorative these elements, or I guess how much potential these elements can provide to an environment to make it restorative. And so I assigned each of these elements a potential restoration score on a scale of -3 to 3. I'll tell you right now, parking lots were assigned a -3 and trees were assigned a 3 for the most part, depending on the tree and its alignment, just to kind of give you a gauge for what these look like. I then applied that potential restoration score geospatially on using a raster, and I'll explain what a raster is in a moment. And then I combined all of these rasters into a heat map that I then categorized into 3 separate categories of high, medium, and low potential. So what is a raster, really quick, just to help you understand? When you take an image and you blow it up, you get this really pixelated image, and you see this grid pattern. That grid is essentially showing you a raster. It has a bunch of different colors within each box that ends up giving you this beautiful picture. When you assign a numeric value to each of these boxes, you get a heat map. And this heat map is showing a heat wave coming through Europe, showing where the areas of 5 degrees Celsius hotter versus 5 degrees Celsius cooler are found in this heat wave. My heat map that I created, combining all of these rasters with these numerical values assigned to each grid, shows the high and low spaces of potential restoration on USU campus. And so I'm going to go through each of these elements that I put into this map and explain what is going on with this heat map. So the first element are trees. The trees were separated out into if they were deciduous or coniferous, and if they were in a scattered or a row orientation. And then because trees, the influence of a tree is not defined only by where the trunk is, I put a 50-foot buffer around each tree. And this was the resulting map. You can see that most of campus space is influenced by trees. These PRS scores, 3 with being the highest, were assigned. The next was enclosure. And enclosure is what you feel when there's dense vegetation around you. And this enclosure was determined with the help of Anna Brown, as she did a study in one of our USU classes about how to determine the enclosure of the campus. Brent Chamberlain was able to direct us in this, and with their help, we found that campus had obviously different levels of enclosure. The highest enclosure received a PRS of 3, while the lowest received a PRS of 1. And because buildings were not a part of the landscape analysis that I was doing, I subtracted the amount of enclosure that a building would give to these areas from my grid, so that it doesn't include the enclosure that the buildings provide. The next 3 elements were water, art, and seating. And they were each done individually, but I combined them on this map because they were so sparse. And water, I gave up to a 15-foot buffer because it's more experienced when you're closer to it. And the further away you get, the harder it is to experience that. And then with art or seating, you can see art from a further distance than you can water features for the most part. And then as well as you can see the benches from further away. So when you see those benches, you'll go to the bench. But once you get 30 feet away, I determined that it was less likely for you to go toward that element if you're more than 30 feet away, which is why it stops at 30 feet. The general landscape was looked at using the planters as one part of it, and then the grass, flowers, bare soil, and gravel. The planters were assigned scores based on the alignment of the plants in those planters, being clustered, formal, or scattered. And then if an area was grass, it received a score, and flowers with bare soil and gravel. One thing to note with the flowers and the bare soil is that a lot of USU campus during the summer has a lot of flowers around it, but during the early spring, it's bare soil. And the areas of bare soil are more likely experienced by the students during their school semesters versus during the summer when there are flowers. And so the survey that I did of landscape shows bare soil in many spaces where during the summer there are flowers. And that's because that's not what students are experiencing. So this is the final raster layer for the general landscape. And then the last 3 were sidewalks, roads, and parking lots. And I determined that if you were in any of these spaces, if you're in a road, first of all, that's dangerous. Second of all, you're not going to be able to feel restored in those environments because of all the hustle and bustle that's going on around you right in those spaces. The further away you get, the more likely it is that you'll find restoration in a space. Therefore, I put buffers on these elements and assign those scores accordingly. So I combined all of these layers, and as I talked about earlier, a raster is a grid and then a heat map assigns values to those grids. And so when you layer them all up, you're able to add these numbers together to get your final heat map. So I layered all of these up, and I made my final heat map using adding those rasters together. And this map was then separated out into high, medium, and low. And using this map, I found that only 11% of the USU landscape fell into the high potential restoration category. That seems extremely low to me. 48% or 41% fell into the medium and 48% fell into the low potential restoration categories. These areas, obviously, all area cannot be high potential, but also we don't want all area to be low potential. So there's going to be some give and take with all of these categories. In order to ground truth this method, because this method hasn't been done before, it's something that I've developed, I found another study done by Schaefer where he takes pictures of these different areas and applies a grid on top of them. And using perimeters and areas of these images with different zones, he assigns a score, of a quality score. The higher the score, the less preferred the landscape is likely to be in this study. And so we can see with this parking lot got a score of 88. In the image next to it is my heat map, showing yellow as low restoration, light green as medium restoration, and dark green as high restoration. You can see that this score of 88 corresponds with with a great area of low restoration. As the scores go down on the images, you can see more and more high restorative areas popping up on my map, which correlates with the results that Schaefer put forth. So what is this map telling us? I applied the campus districts as given to me by the campus planner, and I ran an average of the score within these districts. I normalized it, so it is lower than you might be expecting, but the three academic areas where students are most likely to be spending their time have extremely low scores. Their scores, if put into those three categories, all fall in the low potential restoration area. And that is a problem. If we put these scores into a sense of feel for the place, it kind of means that if you're in these districts, it feels like you're in a parking lot with a few trees and some grass around you. That's what these scores mean about these districts. Understanding that perspective, it is clear that students attending USU need well-designed, mentally supportive spaces that they can access simply by walking to class. To highlight some of the areas on this map that are of high potential, there's the Lavelle Moore's Garden next to the parking structure that has some beautiful views, that has some good plantings and even a water feature and benches that people can go and just ponder and think. It does need some maintenance, but it is a great start. The TSC waterfall area is also really beautiful. You can sit up above the waterfall and feel that sense of being away that the Kaplans talked about. And then the B&R tree alley also can provide, that sense of enclosure that's important. However, this space does need a little help with its maintenance as well, and improvements could be made to make this space more inviting for students. For some areas of medium potential, the Aggie family housing has lots of spaces that can be turned into gardens within each building. There's a central grass space that can be used functionally for sports and get-togethers, but these spaces between each of the buildings can also be used for gardens, for creating restorative areas. The on-campus housing space is good, but it needs also some maintenance, and it needs to be programmed to encourage students to use this space for restoration. The FAV courtyard also is very bare. It is mostly concrete and gravel with very small trees, and feels a little bit like a bit of an expanse that you don't quite know what to do with. And there aren't a lot of specific sitting spaces that are helpful for students, and it can get very hot. So this space can have a lot of improvements to it that are minimal, such as including new plantings, providing new benches that are inviting, and shade structures of some sort could be helpful for this space. The grass field east of the Fine Arts building is, yes, across the street. It is the biggest space on campus that is not programmed for a specific use. It is open, and it is an entrance and an exit for students. This space could be so powerful in how it is used if we could design it as a restorative space, such as one that could function as the Schneider Healing Garden, where that physicist came in and out of work. Students could help them, or this space could help students feel whole as they left campus every day. And then for areas of low potential, it's not a surprise that these are parking lots and roads, but that doesn't mean that we can't do something about them. The north parking lot can be broken up with more plantings, trees that can help it there. The education building alley, it seems like a forgotten space with the food trucks going in and out. There can be planters that are added here, and then the entrance from this into the student housing area can also be more inviting and well taken care of. The east-west corridor here kind of feels like an empty expanse. And if we add planters along the walkways and next to the buildings, then this space could be much more inviting and help students get through it more positively. In the East Gateway, this is kind of the back of house where all the facilities are, but it's kind of like one big parking lot. And something that could be done here is to take 1 or 2 parking stalls and create a garden in those parking stalls that provides shade, that provides a space to have your ice cream next to Aggie ice cream, and or to just sit and ponder. There's a lot of space here, and taking just a little bit of it for these important spaces can change a lot. So some recommendations to summarize: wherever we have non-recreational grass on campus, that space can be turned into a garden. We can use water-wise plantings to help with the water concerns in Utah, but we can also create restorative spaces, more restorative spaces on campus with changing these into gardens. Second, we can, using these spaces, we can create a network of restorative spaces that are mostly are very accessible by students wherever they are. Whatever building they come out of, there's a restorative space waiting for them if they need it. And if they don't need it, then it's still beautiful. And third, for future parking projects, we can look into doing permeable parking with ground cover to improve the restorative setting around parking lots. While the direct alleys and parking lots get a lot of traffic, the actual parking stalls do not. And using those parking stalls as places where we can improve the environment can be powerful as well. And lastly, becoming involved in the Nature RX program headed by Cornell University. Being involved in this would require university involvement at all levels, and allowing students to be prescribed nature for their concerns and pointing them to those spots that are intentionally designed on campus can help students know that this is a campus that cares about them and has put time and effort into providing resources for their mental health. So overall, just some ways that we can continue this work forward is by looking for research grant opportunities to fund projects to build gardens on campus. We can do student surveys to determine the validity of this study, see if there are spaces that were missed in the study that students are saying are restorative for them. We can design garden spaces in collaboration with university students and administration. We can develop another heat map that includes other variables such as tree and plant density and species. And then we can also include an element of architectural analysis to see how historic buildings add to restorativeness versus more modern buildings. There's also the idea of changing the rankings of high, medium, and low. And with those rankings, set a standard that a university campus should have this much of their space be dedicated to high potential restoration areas versus low. We're never going to be able to get rid of all of the low, but it's still going to be very important to have the maximum amount of high potential restorative areas. And then also we can run the model that I've developed multiple times with different values on many different universities and see how universities compare across Utah. And then finally, we can also use the lens of alternative theories. I've used the attention restoration theory put forth by the Kaplans, but there are other theories out there about why nature affects us the way that it does. And using different lenses can help us get a better picture of the state of the campus. Finally, these are just two images from Cornell University that does the Nature Arts program to end with. So, and that is what I have done. Thank you.
You can clap. That's on me. Thank you, Amelia. There's a lot of things to think about associated with this direction of topics. There's a lot of number crunching. There are many. I just wrote down, the need for facilities folks, the administration people, the student services people, the therapists, the CAPS division, and designers. Somehow all those entities and or individuals, teams need to work on something like this together, and that makes it quite complicated. But that's not really a question, it's just a statement. And, what I think you've identified here and kind of walked us through is certainly the need, emphasize the need for attention being given to the natural built environment, if you will, that we all work and largely live in here as students and faculty and staff, and to consider perhaps what we can do with it. And so thank you for your efforts. I think it'd be great for us to have some questions either from the group here or in the chat, or if you want to verbally state your question.
No questions?
Amelia, I have a couple questions for you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, you mentioned the Nature RX at Cornell several times, and one of the times you mentioned that they do analyze spaces, if I understand that correct. Is that accurate?
I haven't read anything about them actually analyzing the space. I think it's more like student surveys.
Okay.
But I don't think they've done anything this methodical about the space they have.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask how your efforts maybe compare to what they've done, but that I must have misunderstood. I'm also curious, as you think about anytime you build a model like this, you know, you assign values, and I know you work really hard to drill those and found those values on literature. But I'm curious if you could talk to maybe some biases that you think crept into your model, or if they crept in, how you dealt with those as you either developed the model or maybe or how you expose those biases in your work.
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're asking how the scores that I've assigned to the elements, how those might reflect biases that I have, and how I've dealt with that.
Parking lots are still -3, Jake.
Yeah. So one question that came up previously when I presented this back during the semester, the spring semester, was that Kuhn kind of pointed out, like, maybe you're being a little harsh on the parking lots, and that, I mean, that's valuable insight. That, you know, like, if I'm rating these based on literature, but not completely, like, I still have my own experience that is going into these. How is that going to affect the results? And I think I don't know how this would ever be done without that, but I think that by doing multiple runs of the model with different values could help kind of extract those biases a little bit. Have lots of different people kind of score these elements themselves and then run those models. And then if you get, you know, 100 models with all these different scores in them, the patterns will start to emerge. And so, well, I was the only one that ran a model in this. I think a future study could be done where you have 50 different people rate these and then run all of those to kind of extract those biases.
Yeah, questions there on your...
So Emily, she's one of my coworkers at Denton House. She said, "What are your hopes for the future of this type of study? And how would you like to see people further this research?" So yeah, just taking the study and refining it, you know, like doing it again with different numbers, doing it again with more people, or also doing student surveys to take them to the spaces that this study has shown, and then saying, how would you rate this environment? There are surveys that have been developed to determine how restorative spaces are for people. And those studies have been tested and proved, and using those studies in a future study to determine if there are spaces we've missed in this, as well as if it confirms what we found, that would be very valuable. But then also applying this to other universities around the nation even, and seeing how it compares to what is happening with the results we have here. Yes, Todd.
I'm so glad you took on this topic because it's so you. I think you're such a caring person and you contributed so much to this department. I want some of your support group to know what an amazing young lady you are. The question that I have for you is, what scale do you think this operates at most effectively? If there are 3 scales of consideration in campus planning and design, there's a whole campus by which you could take Jake's alma mater, Penn State, postgraduate alma mater, and you could say, evaluate the campus based on mental health. There are districts. So if we go back to your 2700 class, which you took and then TA for, is there a district analysis that you could go to the president and say, as you were getting to at the end, these districts seem to be way deficient, and the proximity that someone has in the rhythm of the day vis-a-vis mental health would suggest that there needs to be a certain amount of balance of those elements that you're quantifying in that district. The third scale is a site scale, where you would go and say, Wilcken Associates is interviewing for a job. Are they capable of achieving a high level of score, or have they, in their previous work, demonstrated a sensitivity to that? Do you have a sense of where does this most effectively operate as you've developed it to this point?
I would say it would not be effective at the site level. I would say that at the district and campus level, it would probably be most efficient, but I think because it would work at the campus and the district level in different ways. The district level, it'll show you kind of, most students spend their time in one district. And so that will give you a sense of the experience that that student is having. But at a campus level, you want to see what is available. Where are we doing really well? Where are we not? And so I think the district and the campus level are both valuable. But because it is generalized spaces, the site level wouldn't be as relevant.
I have a couple comments and then I'll be quiet. It seems to me that a definition of nature is necessary, and that a deeper meaning of nature has to do also with fauna.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
Some of these spaces generate the interest and the livelihood of invertebrates, and those bring birds and animals. I shared a lecture that Thomas McGrain gave about the healing aspects of fishing. A lot of it has to do with the interaction with things moving and other beings that are not just plant related.
Mm-hmm.
You had to bring fish into the conversation.
I know, always. I think the element of connectivity needs to be addressed a little bit more specifically. You've got east-west corridor, but connectivity is essential within each district to engage people, to get them to and from, and the social dimensions of that interaction that come out of connectivity. And the last thing is you used the term restoration. And does that mean restorative?
Mm-hmm.
Restoration is a confusing term in the context of planning and design.
Yeah.
Restoration is like, okay, I'm going to restore my fly rod.
My prairie.
Yeah. Restoration hardware. I think you're talking about restorative as the summation of those elements.
Yes. Yes, Carlos.
I have questions unless you want to go with some of those that have been posed.
All right, let's see. So Colin, he's at Denton House. He says, can you elaborate on the decision to remove campus buildings and the enclosure they provide from the metrics for scoring comfort? With buildings as an essential element of a campus, it seems they could be a great contributor to the comfort of various spaces, especially when buildings and landscape are harmoniously designed. Great question, Colin. So because I was focused solely on the landscape and how the landscape affects the restorative experience, with the buildings not being that nature element, I felt like I couldn't include them as part of nature. With all of the research points to how nature affects people, I wanted it to stay solely on nature instead of creating that that crossover between the built environment. And I mean, you can say like, well, then maybe I shouldn't have roads and parking lots, but that's part of the landscape, like the flat landscape that you're walking around, that you're walking in. And once you enter a building, you've entered a different environment. And so just having that distinction kind of made the scope a little smaller, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that should be considered.
It's a layer of complexity that I think would not allow Amelia to graduate in the next 2 more years, and so it's beyond the scope. I think that's
Yeah. Yeah. And then Mark Nielsen, who's a friend from my undergrad, he said, I'm glad you mentioned future work that would include student surveys. I know that parking availability is often a common concern among students, so I wonder it would be hard to get buy-in from the student body. Have you considered this concern? So with parking, yeah, I totally, as a student, understand that you don't want to take parking away. And so wherever parking is a concern, finding unique solutions, such as like using that ground cover and permeable surface that doesn't take away parking, but it adds a restorative element to the parking, could be really beneficial. And then if there are certain spaces that maybe historically are known to have a few extra spaces available, we can use those to create tiny little pocket gardens in those parking lots.
There's also the element of heat island effect.
Yeah.
One of Carlos is great, and my mentors is this guy, Victor Olgay. He would say that there isn't a lot of healing opportunity when someone's trying or, extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that shaded connectivity is a big conversation going on in cities vis-a-vis equity these days.
So having that landscape to help with the shade and making it heat island effect. And then Ryan was one of my coworkers at the engineering firm. He says, I wonder what ideas you have or research you've done as far as including the cost or cost benefit analysis as part of your model. That kind of goes along with the scope, where it would be a really, really valuable addition to this analysis, but it was a little out of the scope of my master's thesis. And so that could be kind of going back to Emily's question about future work. This could definitely be a next step of doing a cost analysis for that. Yes, Carlos.
Quick comment.
Yeah.
First of all, congratulations, because you are doing something that is very difficult, and hopefully we could see more of that, which is bring the qualitative side to geospatial analysis. These worlds seem to be disconnected, and I think you did a great job of connecting them and finding evidence that can help to deal with the qualitative space. And that analysis is great, and I think, to me, the answer to a lot of the questions that were coming from Todd, Colin, and others, I think there is a lot that has to do with design. You need to design the heck out of it. Everything that you are identifying are tons of design projects. And once you start putting that, that's when you start having the qualitative aspect that you are defending so well and you are capturing so well. Design is a lot of the responses of that. David Orr did a lot of things with campus design, talking about how buildings are frozen lessons of power, of education, and we learn in these environments that perhaps were built under a completely different criteria, and they have some often contradict the message that we are sharing in the classroom by the way these buildings were put together. And I think you have a message that is really powerful in that direction. So hopefully you can package in a way, and I guess don't have a question, but a request that you package in a way that it is a shift in the priorities when you're designing a campus. And it's of course, the parking lots are in the areas of more circulation. Everybody wants to be there as close as possible to where they're going. But that shift needs to happen. That is not working. And that is removing all the opportunities that you are identifying.
Right.
So framing it as potential design projects, I think, would be incredibly powerful. That's my request. I'm very pleased with your work. I think it was very elegantly presented, clear ideas, very, very well delivered. And perhaps one last thing, and I do agree with the further discussion of what nature is. I think we need to clarify that a lot better. But all the examples that you were showing as precedents in that, they all had circles in.
Yeah.
And none of what you share here in your analysis had circles. Well, of course, you were not focusing on the elements and science, but
that's part of the design, unless the elements.
and that's the perception part that perhaps others are asking that you need to ask around. But to me, all that perception and all those decisions need to be made for design.
Yeah.
So how do you create good design guidelines that help planners, campus planners, empower campus planners to change the priorities? I think
Maybe that's the next thesis.
correct. But your strongest argument is the mental health.
Right.
And I think that's for the power.
It's interesting, Professor Toth, who used to be he was my mentor when I was here at school. We talked about design related things and how to make things, how to enrich things and strengthen things and places. And it can be perceived, especially in a place like this, a public institution that's always strapped for cash in a fiscally very cautious state. They run a good business, but they are skimpy when it comes to the public realm. There's no question. He would always say, tie things back to the health, safety, and welfare of people. And because everything, and this building is a great example for us, it is purely utilitarian in its function. There's no fluff in this building at all. It was built during a very austere time, and they built walls and windows and hallways and put lights in it. That's about it, right? But there was some attention at least given to some of the creation of spaces in this building because of who was going to be in here. And that saved the thing. I can't imagine what it would be like if it weren't for some folks that had some influence on what it became. But my point is, how do you get past the utilitarian? Or how do you swing the idea of thought to include mental health in the utilitarianism of sort of the public realm in a place like Utah? Does that make sense? It seems like we do almost everything for utility. We have this, if by chance there's 10 cents left over, we can add a different finish, or, the 1% for art sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. There are always things that.
But that's for Thesis, right? The spectrum of fruit is suicide to productivity. At the positive level, it's productivity level, and you've got all the information there. At the most fundamental health, safety, and welfare level, it's suicide rates are up.
Right.
Right? So
That's pretty.
It can be extraordinarily compelling, and somehow we've got to get the attention of the administrators because they're the bean counters. All they see is budgets and dollar signs or lack thereof. And how do you convince them that this is part of the utility? It's part of the health, safety, and welfare, well-being of people who work here, who go to school here, who come here for whatever reason.
You need to drive that home.
When people get assaulted or raped, then
things happen.
glass, report stations go up.
Right.
So the need to make your case vis-a-vis what Dave's saying is that it does come down to those issues, right?
Yeah.
Of suicide.
We don't want to wait for something to happen.
Right.
But
The
yeah.
difficulty is attaching it directly to them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amelia,
Yes.
I guess one observation that I think is worth noting is, these maps that you showed, part of analysis is revealing things and putting things together in ways that people haven't, and it reveals something. And I guess, I'm looking at one of these maps in my other screen here that shows your sort of final crescendo of your efforts as your high, medium, low potential. And it's amazing what it reveals from a structural standpoint. And some of it is what's been talked about is we've obviously been looking at a campus development through the lens of lowest cost, easiest maintenance, vehicular transportation. Like that is obvious in the red areas, right? The actual structure of our campus is all about moving stuff around our campus and not about creating places for people to enjoy or heal, right? I mean, that's what your map tells me. The other thing that your map is interesting to tell us is you mentioned people are moving through campus, but most of our primary corridors are low restoration potential. I mean, that's the places where you have to go to get to another place you have to go through. You have to transition through places that are low restoration potential. Well, that's what your map tells me. It's like, it's screaming that. The other thing that it's screaming is the nucleus of Old Main and sort of the old way that they build campus. And then it radiates, it radiates red from that old part of campus out. And I'm curious if you think from your readings and your literature review, and as well as spending a lot of time wandering around, is that a function of an older way of designing, or is it a function of time where there's big trees and like the maturity? Do you feel like the rest of campus will mature into being higher restoration potential, or do you think it was planned and designed that it will never reach the same heights as maybe the older part of campus?
I don't think it will mature into higher restoration because a lot of the trees on the east end they're not as big as some of the trees on the west end, but they're still big. And like the new landscaping around the concert hall is all gravel and all concrete. And so just that method of designing is not conducive to mental restoration. And so the future planning efforts need to be changed in order to create areas that are restorative. And we need to go back and redesign some of these spaces because there is space to have areas of mental restoration. They just have not been included in the design.
I think we need to let Amelia be done.
She wants to be done.
I think that is all.
Thank you again so much. Thanks for everyone who was joining us online. I'm going to ask, what I may do, if you'll leave the Zoom meeting open, turn the recording on,